Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's event here at Jesus College. My name's Julian Huppert, and I'm the director of the Intellectual Forum here. The Intellectual Forum is a centre based in this wonderful college to provide a space for multidisciplinary discussion for academics, students, industry leaders, policymakers, and members of the public here in Cambridge and around the world. It's great to have those of you who are here online. We've been running for a lot less time than the college. This is our 8th year of running free public events. And last year we had over 6,000 people come along to some of our events. I hope we can do better this year, and this is a wonderful start to that. And it's great to kickstart this academic year's cycle by welcoming Ned Boulting, who we'll see in a moment, who's been an absolutely phenomenal mainstay of British cycling commentary and much more. But you probably know all of that, or everything he does as an author, an entertainer, and much more. What you may not know is that Ned is an alum here at Jesus College. He studied modern and medieval languages. One of his supervisors is here with us. And maybe he'll talk a bit later about how he found his experience here and how he did. But it's also great to have him here because cycling is something that really is quite important to us as a college. We have a very active strategy and transport strategy around cycling here, which I could bore any of you about because it's hugely important. It's important to my team because I think pretty much all of them are very enthusiastic cyclists. And speaking personally, some of you may know I used to be a member of Parliament and was co-chair of the all-party parliamentary cycling group. So it's one of the things I really pushed. Shocking, I know, for a Cambridge MP to care about cycling. But it's really great to have this here. I should also mention another cyclist who's been here a couple of times, in fact, Chris Boardman, who also, as he would say, is very good at cycling round and round in circles. But he's spoken here a couple of times and will hopefully be back as well. Today's a particularly exciting launch because it's not just our event, but it's great to be collaborating with the Cambridge Festival of Cycling over here. And so before we talk about Ned himself, could I just introduce Roxanne? Roxanne is, most importantly, one of the senior research associates here at the Intellectual Forum, and so works with us on a whole range of things. But she also runs an organisation called CamCycle that some of you may have heard of. I recognise some faces from here. Roxanne, do you want to join us and just say a little bit about CamCycle and the festival?
Thank you, Julian, and good evening, everybody. I thought I might just ask for a little wave from trustees, staff, members and volunteers of CamCycle. How many of you have we got? Not bad. Okay, brilliant. Excellent. So if you haven't heard of CamCycle, we're a local charity. We've been around for nearly 30 years. It's our anniversary next year. And we work for more, better and safer cycling for all ages and abilities in and around the Cambridgeshire region. We've got nearly 1,750 paid-up members at the moment, which gives us a little bit of influence through our work. And I guess we could say that there's not much cycling infrastructure in this city and this region that hasn't been shaped by us in some way. Although not always as perfect as we'd like it to be, we always try to play the role of positive, practical and professional when giving advice, somewhat of a critical friend, although occasionally we might resort to a little bit of a public scolding as well. So we're absolutely delighted to have the Intellectual Forum get behind and get involved in our Festival of Cycling, which is here to celebrate the wonderful culture of cycling that we've fostered in the city of Cambridge. It's a festival that runs for a whole month. We're nearing the end now. We've had family-friendly picnic rides. We've had a cargo bike parade, cargo bike tryouts. There's been story time at the library. There's an exhibition at the Fitzwilliam Museum and other places as well. So do get online and see what is running for just the last week of the festival. There's still some things to check out. However, I think you'll all agree that a conversation with Ned Bolting is an absolute highlight. So you don't want to hear from me, but I'll just say that if you'd like to get behind our work campaigning or celebrating the joy of cycling, I would encourage you to join as a member. It doesn't cost much, huge benefit, and you get to know that you're helping us make Cambridge even better for cycling. So thanks, Julian.
Thank you very much, Roxanne. So it really is an immense pleasure to have Ned back here in Jesus, where he really ought to be. So, as I said, he did his degree here, and he started in sports television back in 1997. And has anybody here not seen his commentary or heard his commentary? I'm not seeing a single hand. Oh no, there's one up the top there. Right, there's always one, and particularly this one. But he's also done much more. He's done a one-man Edinburgh Fringe shows about cycling. He's toured around. He's a co-host of the Streets Ahead podcast. He's done so much more, and there's another tour that's about to start. But rather than me tell you everything about him, let's have Ned tell us everything about him. Ned, do you want to come in and join us?
Hello. Working? It's working. Brilliant. You've always got to go, before you go live, you've got to do your tests.
Have you done commentating before then?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, okay. So it's great to have you with us now. We'll just have a bit of a chat first,
yes.
And I think there's a film, and then we'll take questions from the audience here and online, so I'll be keeping an eye on some of those.
Okay.
But I just want to start with a coincidence that you pointed out to me.
Yes.
So this court, West Court here in Jesus, was built, there's a little sort of some ironwork, in 1923.
Yes.
Does 1923 have any significance to you?
I'm completely obsessed by a year. I mean, who'd have thought it? Who'd have thought so many things the way my life panned out? One of them being when I left this place over 30 years ago, the very notion that I would have been invited back by a thing called the Intellectual Forum would have seemed fanciful, but here I am. Life moves in very mysterious ways. I'm completely obsessed by the year 1923, and the reason for that I'll explain. There's a film here that we'll have a little look at, very short film. So when I see anywhere, engraved, as it happens just outside here on a gutter, the four numbers 1923, it strikes accordingly. There's a beer in Sicily called Messina beer that was first brewed and founded in 1923. And it's when I go to Italy now, which I do a lot for work, it's the only beer I'll drink.
Okay.
So I am literally completely obsessed by the year 1923, which I think was... I accidentally discovered was one of the most significant years in European 20th century history.
And you were obsessed before you knew about the film we're going to see, or
no?
No, it was the film that...
It was entirely fortuitous. It was to give you some context. It was a thing that happened to me just as we were this time of year, actually, 4 years ago, just as we were heading down to that awful second phase of lockdowns in 2020. I'd just finished commentating on the Tour de France, which happened that year late. It only wrapped up in September, almost exactly this time of year, actually, because it was delayed because of the COVID pandemic. So it's truly historic and weird for all sorts of reasons, not least of which we couldn't go to France to broadcast it, which is what we always used to do. So we were stuck in some studios in Kent, in Maidstone, and we used to commute, Chris Boardman, myself and the rest of the team, we used to commute from where our accommodation was about 2 or 3 miles outside Maidstone in a place called Leeds Castle, which is an amazing 12th century castle with a moat around it, where the Good Friday Agreement was negotiated, amongst other things. An incredible thing. And there is a reason I'm telling you all this, right? On the very last day of the Tour de France, which is stage 21, it finishes in Paris, and it finishes now in the evening, so not in the afternoon. It's quite late. We'd wrapped up the last broadcast. It was the first year that Tadej Pogacar won the Tour de France. It was an extraordinary event. And we came off air, and I cycled home to Leeds Castle. Only, if you step outside now, you'll realise it's dark. I hadn't realised how dark it was, and I had no bike lights. But I kind of knew the way. And I ended up basically riding in the pitch dark as fast as I could into a moat. Shattering my arm, completely breaking it, the humorous here, and needing 3 plates and 13 pins and all that sort of thing. Anyway, I came out of this gloom into another series of lockdowns, and I thought, I can't be doing with this, and I fell into this sort of absolutely despondent state, wondering what was happening to me and what was happening to the world. And I'm sure a lot of us felt that way heading into that next Christmas. And suddenly, out of the blue, I got a message from a friend who said, there's an online auction coming up in a couple of weeks, and there's a lot 212 in this online auction might interest you. And I clicked on the link. I very nearly didn't click on the link. I thought it was spam, I clicked on this link, and the auction, this lot, which sat in a whole load of sort of football and rugby and cricket memorabilia as a sole sort of like representative of the world of cycling, was a battered reel of film whose provenance was unknown. The auction house clearly didn't know much about it. It said, rare cycling footage, Tour de France, question mark. That's all it said. And I put in a bid, a maximum bid of 140 quid, and sat back and waited. My opening bid was 110. No, 100 I bid. And then someone else came and bid 110, and I said, right, 120, but I kind of wasn't going to go much higher than that. And I won it. And a few days later, a jiffy bag, it's quite a common theme in cycling, a jiffy bag arrived through my letterbox, bounced along the corridor and settled up next to the hot up pipe of my radiator, which I subsequently discovered could have burnt my house down entirely, because the jiffy bag contained nitrate film, which is spontaneously combustible and will burn for a day. I kind of unraveled the film. It was very brittle, 35mm film, so all the frames were about that big. Quite, you could see quite a lot of detail. That was the first thing I saw, this map here. And I noted that it looked like a kind of a rudimentary stage map from the Tour de France, not totally dissimilar to what we deal with now. The quatrième étape, this crazy distance, 412 kilometers. But no date, no more information than that. And I kind of span through it. And eventually, well, it didn't take me long to realize that this precious little reel of film was probably going to take over my life. Instantly, I knew that I wanted to firstly see it move, actually get it restored and digitized so I could see it. I knew it was pretty short. And secondly, I wanted to know everything about every body in the film, every building in the film, and every event in the film, and wring it dry of information. And for 2 years, that's what I did.
Wow. Do you know who lost the bid to you? Would they have? Have you found out?
Yeah, I mean, what a prospect! I very nearly didn't get it, yeah. And it kind of like genuinely, for my mental health and everything, it saved my life at that point. It was a completely immersive obsession, which has a long tail, it's the reason I'm here today in many ways. Yeah.
I mean, do you want to tell us about it? Should we watch it first? Which would you rather?
Well, just to let you know, I eventually established that this was from stage 4 of the 1923 Tour de France. The tour paused during the First World War. The only time it's ever had any interruptions were for both the Great Wars. It paused for 1914, 15, 16, and 17, and 18, came back in 1919, and for the next 6 editions, it held a completely identical route, which in the old days started and finished in Paris and used to circumnavigate pretty much the entire country, hugging the coast. So it would go to Cherbourg, it would go to Brest, right over in the top left-hand corner, right down down towards Bayonne, Les Sables d'Olonne, into the Pyrenees, along the French Riviera, Alps, and then, of course, because France had reclaimed Alsace-Lorraine, they made a big point of going to Strasbourg, which made it an even bigger race. And then eventually coming back to Paris, 15 stages long. Every second day was a rest day, because the stages were, an average of 450 kilometers long, on bikes with 2 gears, to be fair,
yeah.
A kind of flat gear and a climby gear. And the way that you would flick between the gears would be you'd have to come to a complete standstill, pop out your rear wheel, turn the rear wheel around and put it back in. And deciding when to do that on the Col de Tourmalet was quite a key moment. So because they were so long, there were no tarmac roads, it was all gravel, just to make it easier. There was no freewheel, so when they were coming down the descents, they'd have to put their legs out like that and the pedals would go like that. But it was a fully professional, venerable event in its 20th year. They would have to start at 2 o'clock in the morning in the pitch black, and they would have to ride for 4 hours in the pitch dark before the sun came up, and then they would continue until very nearly sunset the next day. So that's why they needed a rest day every second day. What we're about to see is belongs to Pathé. So Pathé France would send a camera along to film the Tour de France. The camera person would film 3 stages and then put all the footage on a train to Paris. And then they would splice together a little highlights reel of maybe about 10 minutes for 3 stages, and that would get printed about a dozen times and distributed to mostly cinemas in Paris, and then shown as a kind of B-roll before the main feature. And then, because it was nitrate film, get thrown away, literally thrown away. So almost nothing from that era still exists, because the nitrate film is very, very dangerous, and it used to get just destroyed. So this is an incredibly rare find. You can see that one rider, when we run the film, is identified. He's a little-known Belgian rider called Théophile Beekman, who would go on to win 2 stages of the Tour de France and finish 4th overall. But he was a bit of a nearly mad, never really made the grade into being the greats, and his history has basically been completely forgotten and erased, even amongst his own family. And part of my mission in this book was to trace successfully his living descendants and tell them about their grandfather, because I became a walking encyclopedia about everything that is knowable on the planet about Théophile Beekman. There's also a couple of characters who, maybe if we can watch the film through one time and then maybe I can just spool it on a little bit, I can tell you who they are and how I managed to identify who they are, and one of them is of great significance. But I think it's a very moving film, and I hope you agree, and it's 2.5 minutes long. It's not complete. We don't see who wins the stage, because I think the film burnt before it got to the end. So it's about 2.5 minutes long, and it begins like this.
So here we go.
And that's it.
No. I mean, some of it looks just like the Grand Depart we had in Cambridge. I mean, it's almost exactly the same. But
Absolutely, just outside Kelsey Kerridge, wasn't it? I remember it well. I remember that day, actually. Sorry, this is a wild diversion, but I remember when the Tour de France came to Cambridge in 2014. I was working for ITV. It was before I used to be the commentator, so I used to do the interviews and the reports. And I remember all the riders were lined up to start, literally outside Kelsey Kerridge. That was where the start line was. And we were live on ITV1, and I muscled my way into the peloton, grabbed Chris Froome, who'd won the race the previous year for the first time, had number 1 on his back, and I was interviewing him live on the telly, And I got about 3 questions in, and he had a slightly panicked look in his eyes on my 3rd question. And he's a very polite man. He politely interrupted me, and he said, sorry, Ned, they've started? Not my finest hour. I wonder if you could just spool back a little bit, if that's possible. I don't know how sensitive that is. Maybe to the first scene, actually, where there's the crowded, I think you can go right back. Yeah, so jump on to the next scene. It's only about 5 or 10 seconds on, sort of thing. Just let it go from there. I noted that when you see all these riders line up at this checkpoint in Lorient in Brittany, I noticed this enormously tall man who strides forward and he sets them on their way. Yeah? There he goes. And if you can just stop it there, he only does that after he has a conversation with this gentleman. He's almost going out of frame there. If we can maybe just run it back, you can see that again, that little exchange. That's significant because I find out that the really tall gentleman is a guy called Robin Desmarais, whose nickname was Big Bob. He was the commercial director of the Tour de France, but he wasn't the boss. He sets them on their way only when the boss is happy. Now watch them, they're in conversation here. There they are. This gentleman here says, yes, you can go. He's got an elegant cap on and a long coat. Unfortunately, he doesn't turn to face the camera, but that is Henri Desgrange, the founder of the Tour de France, the man who called the race into its existence, a French cultural icon, and anyone in France knows that name. Enormous heft it carries. And to the best of my knowledge, it took me ages to ascertain that was definitely Desgrange. Comparing newspaper reports and knowing that he was there there and there was this conversation between him and Desmarais. It's definitely him. And to the best of my knowledge, that's the only existing film of the founder of the Tour de France. And Pathé have kind of confirmed that to me when I returned the film to them. And if you can just jog on a little bit to maybe about, I'm guessing about here, something like that. Right the way through this scene.
Sorry.
I bet they're loving this on the live feed, this bit. Are you able? You can't scroll on.
I don't seem to be able to, no.
Okay.
Sorry.
Right, well, I'll gas on a little bit. There was one point where I was really literally descending into weirdest rabbit holes. So that's called the Café Glou. And I tried to find out as much as I could about the Glou family of Lorient, including finding receipts from their grocery shopping from the 1930s, about 4 years later, trying to work out who that was in the doorway and those Breton waitresses there. At one point, I became obsessed with this photographer here who steps out and takes a picture, bang, like that. And I thought that I'd found that exact picture in the online archives of Lorient. But then looking at this wonderful, quite long shot, this goes on for about 45 seconds, I thought at first, how the hell am I going to identify any of these riders? They all look identical. Until I realised this chap has got a different coloured jersey completely from anyone else. And then I realised that is the maillot jaune. That's the yellow jersey of the Tour de France. And on stage 4 of the 1923 Tour de France, that's Ottavio Bottecchia, who would go on to become the first Italian ever to win the Tour de France. And that's him at his first race in France. That man there, just going backwards there, that's Henri Pélissier, who would win the race for France that year, ending a sequence of Belgian victories. And just finally, we can stop it here. Here is the introduction of, actually just run it on. We can stop it after this. Here's the introduction of this mystery Belgian. They've spelt his name wrong, which didn't help. You can see him attacking alone, but he's actually being followed by a member of the public. Who, as you can see, he can't keep up. And by the time they get off the bridge, he's been fully dropped. So there's lovely details like that we can stop here. We don't need to see the rest. But you can see the kind of depths of insanity that led me down this path over the course of a couple of years to produce this book, which you mentioned I'm going on a theatre tour. I'm in the last throes of turning it into a stage show, which I'm touring around the country in about 3 weeks' time. Unfortunately not to Cambridge, but there we go.
We talked about this earlier, we definitely need to get you here to do the show.
Yeah.
And so you play all the roles? And
I play all the roles, which is quite challenging. Very challenging, especially for a non-actor.
I wonder if that makes you by definition an actor if you're doing it.
No, I'm certainly. If you come and see the show, you'll realise I'm not an actor.
Right. Well, you heard it here first. A great opportunity, not an actor.
Yeah, definitely not an actor.
Performing in a show. Because you've done lots of shows, some of which are very funny. Is this one?
Some of them are very funny,
Well,
yeah.
is this one intended to be?
It is intended, like, I don't want people, like, a bit like this evening, it would be miserable if everyone just came in here and left with a scowl on their face. I kind of like people coming out and enjoying themselves and having a bit of a laugh, particularly when I do my stage show. It's very theatrical, so all the shows I've done to this point, this is the 5th show, have been designed to make people laugh. Problem is with this book is there's not a single joke in it. Not one. It's really quite bleak, the story here. So I'm working hard on, when I put it on stage, making it funny as well, which is proving a bit challenging, but we'll get there.
We'll see soon. But you've mentioned the tour.
Yeah.
Can I just move from sort of historical,
Yes.
1923, to 2023 and other tours?
Yeah.
Because you've now been involved for 20-something tours?
I think it's 22 tours, yeah.
And how did you get started?
Oh, God. Well, again, providence, really, a bit like the way this jiffy bag entered my life with the film in it. I had no control over what happened to me. I had become a football reporter, and that was the sport I was very interested in. I knew nothing about cycling, but the broadcaster I was working for, doing my football work, acquired the rights to show the Tour de France in the UK, ITV, and they didn't really have, well, they didn't understand what they bought either, and they didn't really have enough boots on the ground, reporters to go out and do it. So in a fit of desperation, they just pointed at me and said, can you go off to France to do this funny bike race thing? And I thought, well, that'll be a nice long weekend in Paris. Hadn't really done my research. Didn't realise it lasted 3 weeks and was what it was. But I was sent in 2003 to cover my first Tour de France, which was the kind of height of the Lance Armstrong years, his 5th win. Even though, as you pointed out to me earlier, you and me have both won as many Tours de France as Lance Armstrong has. But it was his 5th victory, and so it was a heck of a time to get as a journalist, to get thrown into this, to grapple with the scale and the complexity and just the sheer difference of an event like the Tour de France, and then to be kind of separated from this global sporting icon at the height of his powers by no more than the width of a microphone reach, a day after day after day with him in the yellow jersey. It was a phenomenal responsibility, but a weird privilege as well, because it was, as a journalist, it was an exceptional time to come into the sport.
And I mean, cycling and a race like the Tour is a very complex thing. People are all trying to achieve very, very different goals.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to understand everything that was going on and then to be able to tell people what was going on?
I mean, simple answer to that is a very, very long time. To trust my opinions and realise that I probably had understood that correctly. Must have been a process that lasted 6 or 7 years before I had any degree of confidence in what I was saying. I think I was quite good at listening. So maybe it helped my early work, where predominantly I was interviewing riders, that I could genuinely, out of a spirit of proper curiosity, ask them what the hell had just happened, And I kind of meant it. What did you just do? How did you just do it? Tell me about it. So maybe that helped, actually. And then it was a whole other kind of graduation process of banishing the imposter syndrome, to take that step up from, if you like, my role, which was interviewing riders before and after the race, to actually being the voice that accompanies the experience of viewing the live race as it unfolds, because that is a genuine. You're kind of like, when stuff happens, like Mark Cavendish breaking the Merckx record, your whole, and it means a lot to people, stuff like that, who follow the Tour de France, who've cracked the code, under whose skin it has really got. When you're confronted with a live moment like that, you're holding something special for people, actually, and it's a very big responsibility, because that footage will live online and in people's memories for a long time. So that's a real honour, yeah.
And do you ever go back and watch your previous commentary and judge?
I mean, I would not go back and look at my first year.
Okay.
Put it that way. I think I've improved. I don't know. I don't often do it. But sometimes it gets thrust in my direction, and I have no choice but to relive it.
And who have you found most enjoyable to interview, to interact with? Which riders are really exciting and communicative?
I mean, as a species, kind of all of them, because I will, I'll go into a bit more detail, but I mean, I genuinely mean this. I think that the discipline of becoming a racing cyclist, especially less so on the track, but definitely on the road, and to compete in a 3-week Grand Tour, the biggest and the hardest of which is the Tour de France, I think self-selectingly requires a very special collection of human characteristics. In other words, they are mad in very, very many different ways. From the truly psychotic, and I mentioned a rider earlier on who fits into that category, to just the downright peculiar. I think they have a self-destructive, masochistic streak that is very hard to understand if you are not a racer in the Tour de France, which none of us are or ever will be. They're very different. And I also think and this has changed a lot. When I came into the sport in 2003, it was still a francophile experience. One of the reasons I found it very attractive actually is because my German was very good, but my French was a little bit shabby, and I loved to be reacquainted with that language. But there were British riders in the peloton, and Australians and Americans, and they'd all spent time living in Spain or France or Italy or Flanders, acquiring sometimes second and third languages and speaking the language of the peloton, which most assuredly was not English. And I found that very refreshing, because I think we're very used in this country to kind of claiming, quite rightfully actually, ownership over so many of the global sports. We've codified and invented association football, rugby, cricket, probably had a part to do with hockey, golf, kind of motorsport, I think is quite a British thing, tennis. You name it, the big sports are all kind of pretty much have come from here, not road racing. Like the Tour de France and Britain, is oil and water. So I found that, the otherness of it, and the fact that I was meeting sort of Anglophone riders who'd made that cultural jump into something deeply foreign, I found fascinating, and I greatly admired those riders for that. Yeah. Mark Cavendish, though.
Right. I was just going to push you. Yeah, what about Mark?
Mark Cavendish is one of the most complex humans I've ever met. He is, when you least expect it, he is truculent, borderline offensive, can be dismissive, arrogant, and utterly disdainful. When you least expect it, when you approach him and you think this is going to be the softest, loveliest interview, he's just done something really special, not a care in the world, and he'll bite your head off for no reason. And when you most expect him to be at his worst, he will pull out these wonderful, charming, very generous, warm epithets, and he'll mean it as well. So he's a bundle of contradictions, but one of the most extraordinary athletes, obviously, in Tour history, but in the entire history of British sporting endeavour. I can't think of many greater than Mark Cavendish, to be honest, for their sheer infallibility. If you saw him win that 35th stage win this year, it was every decision he took in that final kilometre was not only completely correct, it was also utterly intuitive and done in a split second on total instinct. I interviewed him the other day about that, and he relived it. We were talking about, for a written thing, we were talking about the final 300 metres of that stage, and it took him 25 minutes to discuss it. There was that much that he wanted to say about it.
I think also that he remembers every bit of it. And
that's always been a hallmark of his, just crazy memory.
Phenomenal. Now, there's a few other things I do want to explore, and then we will come back to any topics. There will be time to ask questions, or if you're online, please do use the Q&A feature there. But can I just, because your Streets Ahead, for example, doesn't just talk about the ultra-elite tour.
Doesn't talk about it at all. No, doesn't talk about it at all.
Because it talks about something which is a common thing for, I think, many of us in the room, about active travel, cycling. How did you get involved with cycling, sort of utility cycling as a way to get from A to B, not like this?
That's a really good question, really good question. So my history with the bike starts at around about the age of 6 or 7 when my dad took me to the local rec, we called it, just outside our house where I grew up. And I often say this, and I mean it, but I think, we all have completely different histories and reasons for being here in this room. But I bet you that we can pretty much all remember the moment when the adult guiding hand suddenly let go of the saddle and we realised to our absolute delight and shock that we were riding independently. That childhood memory, I don't get all Freudian about it, but I think it's quite Freudian. I think it's a genuinely, I think it's quite a shared moment that we can all draw on, and I think it's incredibly powerful. So I had that moment, like everybody pretty much in the country. I rode a bike all the way through my teens. I got a place at Cambridge University. I came to Jesus College. I borrowed my mum's bike, which I took thinking, I'll have a bike in Cambridge. Lost it within about 2 weeks. I think it was stolen, probably just left it outside the pub, if I'm perfectly honest. And then that was it. That was me, aged 18, done with cycling for a long, long time. Then you have to fast forward to the Tour de France and my exposure with the bicycle again in 2003. I came back from that first, this is how childish and infantile I am in my thinking. I came back from that first Tour de France in 2003 and I went down to Halfords to buy a bike. I suddenly thought I need a bike in my life. So I spent 80 quid on a totally inappropriate, awful kind of mountain bike hybrid thing, thinking, I'm going to ride that round London now. And I rode it 2 miles to the nearest tube station and chained it up and then took the tube the other 6 miles into town, thinking, that'll do. And that was quite hard, Every day I'd come back and another bit of my bike had been nicked. And I'd go to the local bike shop in Woolwich, I'd go, and he'd say, what now? And I said, the handlebars, the back wheel, the saddle, one by one, it had all gone. And he said to me, where do you actually work? And I said, at the time, I worked in the South Bank studios, in ITV studios on the South Bank. He said, but that's only about 7 miles from here. So why don't you just ride it all the way? Like that. And I went, don't be stupid. 7 miles! So I tried it, and it turns out it worked. I was absolutely baked in sweat and very, very slow indeed. And I went, that's actually literally amazing. And so for a few years then, I kind of wasn't long before I bought a road bike with what I like to call drop handlebars, a racer. And then I got all kind of then I couldn't get it into my head that I thought you had to, every single time you cycled, you had to clip in, wear Lycra, get all the stuff like that, even to ride 6 miles to work. And for a few years, I misguidedly behaved like that until I went, what am I doing? And then I stopped wearing Lycra, and I got a bike that didn't have drop handlebars, and now I just roll a trouser leg up, and I sold my car years and years and years ago, and I get absolutely everywhere I need to be by bike. But so active travel, and I've become very passionate about it. Streets Ahead, I co-host with Adam Tranter and Laura Laker, who are deeply steeped, people you know very well, deeply steeped in the minutiae of kind of how we lobby for this and advance its cause. I'm the kind of ignorant outsider, much like I was in the Tour de France. But I tell you this, the seed of kind of my involvement with this is definitely the Tour de France. Definitely. And I'm living proof of that. And when people say to me, oh God, look at the Tour de France, look at the cavalcade of carbon-emitting vehicles that go with it everywhere. It's a carbon footprint nightmare, the Tour de France. I have to concede that, yes, it kind of probably is. But on the other hand, it is the single biggest shop window for this slightly magical 150-year-old invention called the bicycle that still has the power to do so much good in the world and whose power we are only beginning to sort of unlock in this country. So I would argue that without the Tour de France saying, remember the bicycle, right, across the world, then the power of the bike, the visibility of the bike is massively diminished.
I'm pleased to see you credit the Tour rather than having bits stolen, so it's not a strategy we've been trying to do to get people to cycle more, steal bits. In a moment, I am going to take sort of some other questions, but I do just want to do the sort of parochial question. So you were here at Jesus.
Yes.
How was it then? How were you then? And as you know, we have one, your German supervisor here, who can verify anything
Dr.
you
Minden.
say about,
Yeah. Well, he did. We just had dinner together before, and he did I did notice, and it was a bit of a barb, to be perfectly. It didn't go totally unnoticed, Michael, but I did notice you slipped into the conversation. Yes, you got a 2-2. I don't blame you for that. I don't blame you for that. But Michael was a brilliant professor, and I was a very average student because I found other things to take my attention away in Cambridge, and I then neglected my studies to my great regret, and I spent pretty much all my time messing around at the ADC Theatre up the road instead, where I had a lot more fun.
And learned how to communicate, presumably.
Well, maybe.
Yeah, when you say you're not an actor, you spent a lot of time acting.
I call it
Acting up.
acting? Yeah, acting. Showing off, I think. Yeah.
So, I mean, fantastic. But you had a good time. I should be careful asking this question. Do you have a good time?
I had a great time, and I made contact with Michael late on last year because I had a question about Goethe that had been bugging me for 35 years. So I literally emailed him out of the blue. We haven't communicated for 35 years. I said, can I meet up because there's something I want to ask you about Goethe? And he very kindly gave me a guided tour last autumn of the college, and I found it profoundly moving, actually. And I had a great time in this college. It's yeah. I wouldn't say the best years of my life, but probably on the podium.
Well, a podium finish is amazing, and at least that stage. I'm glad I got that answer. So we do now have time for questions from people here or from online. I have a team around with microphones, so please do wait for the microphone because only the online people can't hear you shout. Does anybody have any questions that they want to pick up? Can I start over here?
So I read The Unforgettable Year 1923, and I was waiting for one name to appear. Now, I bet people say this to you a lot. It's Paul de Vivi.
No one said that to me before. but you're going to tell me who he is.
I think you should find out.
We're just going to leave it at that?
So by 1923, he'd been working on a thing that he called cycletourism. And he's largely responsible for the invention of the derailleur. And he was organising fixed wheel versus derailleur competitions. He was in touch with the tour.
That is interesting.
And he organised a parallel tour.
With derailleurs? Yeah. I'd heard about that, actually. I didn't know the name, but yeah, it's interesting. The Tour de France railed against technology that would make it faster and easier.
It would be fascinating.
De Grange said that the derailleur was feminine.
Yes. Yeah, he was a sexist racist, as well as being a great man.
It would be fascinating to see the tour run on those old-style bikes now.
To see they'd be long shifts in the commentary, I have to say.
That I see the objection.
Yeah.
Any other questions from? There's one at the back there.
Yeah, I've just got one comment and a question, Ned. The comment was a couple of us in this room were actually at Mark Cavendish's, the start of that stage on his record-breaking day. Did you know that he was about 30 seconds late starting that day?
It wasn't my fault.
I'm not blaming you. Yeah, just happened to notice that, yeah. So he definitely was the fastest that day, for sure.
Yeah. That is interesting, yeah.
And the question was about the film, actually. Presumably it was a silent film.
Yes.
That was it. So
you well spotted. I added some music to that.
Yeah, interesting choice. Good choice of music. It goes well with it.
The music, as when I'm writing my show as well, I've made a point of there's lots of music in the show. And all the music was either first performed or composed in 1923. That included that, I can't remember the exact piece, it's a trio by Fauré, and it's beautiful.
Sounds really good, it goes well with it, I think, yeah.
And the reason I put it does feel slightly sacrilegious, because part of the point of the film is it's a silent film. But I've talked about this book at quite a lot of literary festivals and things, and it is slightly uncomfortable if you just sit in total silence for 2.5 minutes. You can hear a pin drop, but it was quite a big decision actually because it does feel slightly wrong.
But just to be clear, by the way, you don't have to be male to ask a question. In case anybody was unclear. But can I just, because it's appropriate, one question that's come in online from Matt Oliver. My first memory is listening to the intro music of the Tour de France and watching the highlights with my dad. Do you know whether the highlights are secure on ITV4 for the foreseeable future?
No, I don't. No, sadly I don't. I hope they will. I think they're on the brink of re-signing a deal. But I think, and this isn't a partisan point whatsoever. Lots of friends and colleagues who work for subscription television do a terrific job. But I think for the visibility, we talk about visibility of the tour, for its status, I think it needs to retain a free-to-air home in this country. I think it would be very disappointing if it didn't, because other sports have suffered in that way as well.
Agreed. Yes.
Hi, Ned.
Hello, Roger.
Oh, is that working? Yes. You mentioned that being thrown in the deep end with the Tour de France,
Yeah.
your skill that got you through that was listening. And I was wondering how that skill now carries forward and what advice you might have for us in the room when we're trying to move forward the case for active travel. Clearly you listen to Adam and Laura a lot, but what might we be able to learn for those who maybe don't agree with us and applying the skill of listening?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest hurdle to overcome, the biggest obstacle, is the polarisation of the debate now, and the silos we sit in. And Adam and Laura, both campaigners and journalists, well, Laura's a journalist, are full of detail, full of passion, full of conviction about it, and I agree with almost everything they say. And I think they would concede this, they live in an echo chamber, the pair of them, and very rarely actually engage with any voices from outside of that. And it's incredibly important, I think. I, for a while, was kind of like, I found myself a few years ago kind of ending up on the Sky News, BBC News, radio kind of list of people to go to when there's been some story about cyclists shooting red lights or, knocking people over or, just generally behaving badly, because there's never any discussion in the mainstream media about the carnage and the maiming and the injury at the hands of motor drivers. That's not a discussion. I can't remember a single phone-in or debate about that ever. And yet, every time that cycling sort of appears to transgress the rules, it gets picked up on. And for a while, I became one of the go-to kind of like people would call up, and I'd have to sit in studios and sort of debate these issues, often with very ill-informed people. And I got fed up with it because I felt like I was making no headway or impact. So I think I think Chris Boardman's extremely good at it. He has one particular method which is very easily comprehensible, absolutely irrefutable sound bites that make total sense on every level. And he'll just drop a truth bomb in there and go, well, it might be as simple as this. And it leaves most of his opponents nowhere to go. I think that there's a lot to be said for taking on board people's opposition, but understanding people's opposition in the sense that it's simply a matter of things that they don't understand, and they're afraid of things that they don't understand. Because if you have no experience of cycling, you don't realise that the expressions of people riding a bike are as wide and varied as they are of people walking. You could be going for a stroll with a friend, you could be walking urgently to get to the bus, or you could be just walking down to the shops, or just walking on your own, listen to it. And there's loads of different ways of walking, and there is many different ways of cycling, but it's just not understood from people, especially people behind the wheel of a car having a miserable experience. Because let's face it, it's horrible driving on British roads. It's a horrible. We've all done it, I'm sure, most of us, and it's a horrible experience. And I think we have to just make that effort, however much it might stick in the throat, of kind of like going over and seeing it from their side. Otherwise, we're not connecting. We're not going to get through to them.
Question in the middle there.
Could I borrow from my colleague up here to start with a comment and then a question? The comment, and I'm sure I speak for everyone here, is what a fabulous presentation, really very enjoyable indeed.
Thank you.
And the question I want to ask is, you said, especially at the beginning, that cyclists or super-duper cyclists are all rather psychopaths, and you said a number of negative things about them.
You're going to tell me you won the Tour of Britain in 1962 now?
And I'm totally sensible, yes. No, well, you've almost got to where I was going to go, which is to say, what about other sportsmen? What about tennis players or rugby players?
Yeah. I get that, and I think there's a degree of commonality, but I think still cycling, and road racing in particular, stands out as a particular pursuit. you know, David Miller, who I commentate with, who's now 10 years retired, got the shock of his life in 2016 when he retired in 2014, and because riding and racing and training on a bike is actually horrible most of the time, he just chucked his bike away and didn't want to see it. And for 2 years, he took no physical exercise at all of any description. He got the shock of his life when we were both presented with Brompton folding bikes. Then we started riding them together at the Tour de France. And I remember on stage 2 of that year's Tour de France, riding the last 20 kilometres of the stage into Cherbourg, just to get to work, really, over a series of little climbs like that. And I dropped him. I mean, I dropped him easily. And I thought he was taking the mick, and I looked round, and he was absolutely flat out, and he was gasping, and I dropped him comfortably. And he's never spoken about it. But boy, did it change him. What he has said is that, you know, if you're Roger Federer or something like that, it doesn't matter if you suddenly become 17 stone, you can still look fantastic on a tennis court. You can do things with that ball and a racket. You know, those skills will never leave you, those ball skills. And I think, you know, you look at footage of Diego Maradona at his biggest, still doing crazy things and having fun and, you know, ball juggling. When a cyclist goes to seed, they're just crap, aren't they? They can't do what you do any better than what you do. You know, there's nothing there. So it is, the life of a professional racer is unendingly hard. Most of them in that 176 rider peloton will never really win a race. If they do, over an entire career, you look at their Palmares, 4 wins, maybe, you know, over a 12-year period. That's the life of most of them. 6-hour training rides through, on your own often, through the, you know, all weathers, often with not very much financial reward. Mark Cavendish has explained it to me. He says, if you want to understand this sport, the Tour de France, then you have to understand suffering. Suffering is our badge of honour. He said, forgive me, this is if you're a bit squeamish, but it's a memorable way of describing it. He said, the Tour de France is somebody getting a pair of pliers and pulling your fingernails out very, very slowly. And he said, the last person to say, can you stop, is the winner. It's brutal. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. And so that's what I mean by a very particular type of personality that can embrace that challenge and even enjoy it. Although very few of them actually enjoy it, I think. I think probably at the moment, since Mark Cavendish is now retired, and he definitely enjoyed it, I think there's one rider who enjoys it, and that's Tadej Pogacar.
Yes, there's a question here.
Hi, Ned.
Hello.
You were mentioning earlier how all-consuming writing the book was. I think reading the book for everyone was also pretty obsessive. It was a fantastic read.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think the first time I watched the actual clip,
Yeah.
I thought, wow, that's amazing. I think I watched it about 10 or 12 times on the bounce just to try and absorb what was it like for you the first time that you saw that clip and realised that it was going to pretty much dominate the next few years of your life in terms of writing the book?
I realised that. It took me months. If you've read the book, you'll realise it took me months to find some film restorers who could actually make it, because without getting technical, they couldn't really put it on the sprockets were so fragile, they couldn't put it onto a thing and make it run, which would be the normal way of digitising a real film. So they had to do it like for almost frame by frame. And so it took months for that to come. By that time, I had looked at the still frames and realised, but then I remember, and it was literally, you know, it was 100 years old, and just the touch and the feel and the look of the film was so special to me that it felt really wrong and anachronistic when an MP4 arrived by email. You know, but I don't have a television at home, but I do have a kind of projector and a white wall, and so I fired up my laptop and projected it against the white wall and just pressed go and sat there. I was all on my own in the house, and it literally took my breath away. Even now, even 4 years on, I mean, how many times do you think I've seen it? You know, I can tell you every frame, but even now I can watch it over and over again, and I'm quite annoyed by the things that I've missed, because they're there, which maybe there's a sequel, but yeah. It's very powerful. I don't know why. I don't know why it's so powerful, but it really is.
Can I bring in a couple of questions from online? The first one, you're talking about unusual characters. First one's from Terence Day. who's your favourite cycling co-commentator, and were you influenced by the likes of Phil Liggett with your commentary style? And the other question just says, what was working with Phil really like?
So Phil Liggett, for those who don't know, is the still going. He commentates for the American network. He's the voice of cycling. My entire education, Phil has commentated on over 50 tours. It's a huge number. When you stack that up, it's damn nearly half the history of the entire race. He's seen epochs come and go. He was deep into sort of 30 years by the time Armstrong started. It's extraordinary. And his voice will always mean certain years to me. I've got nothing for respect for Phil's work. I think, to some extent, the cycling public had become a little bit different by the time that I took over, and maybe the time is right for a slightly different approach to commentary. And so the production team sort of bullied me for years, saying, you should give it a go, you should give it a go. And we talked about imposter syndrome early on. I said, I can't possibly. And then after about 2 years of this, I kind of cracked and tried it out. But I always knew in the back of my mind that I could only take on this challenge if David Miller had retired. So I was waiting for him to retire because I'd interviewed him for my entire career to that point, and I knew that he could speak about the sport with a degree of nuance, complexity and understanding and a vocabulary to go with it that I'd never heard from anyone else. And I kind of liked him. I found his checkered career fascinating. He was a doper. He served a 2-year ban and he could talk about it. And I think that's incredibly important when you're dealing with a sport like cycling that, will always have an ongoing battle with doping. And to have someone who'd been there, done that, and would talk about it felt important as well. So, yes, David Miller is the best co-commentator I've worked with.
There was another question here, but just before, because there was a question that came in about the Jiffy bag that you mentioned. What was your take on it and how Team Sky did? And do you see any differences now?
Doping, one way of looking at doping, and perhaps the best way of looking at doping, given that sport and the Tour de France are simply things that human beings do. They sit in the world of human endeavour, much like accountancy or the law or anything really. So it's no different. It's just a thing that human beings do. Doping, I think, should be looked at not so much as an ethical issue, but as a legal issue. And if you look at it through that filter, then everything seems to make a bit more sense to me. If you look at it purely through an ethical filter, very quickly you might arrive at the conclusion that you shouldn't be watching any of it. If you look at it with a legal sort of application, that there are laws that are transgressed or laws that are pushed to the limit, then you're probably more realistic. And I think the Jiffy bag, in as much as I understand it, and I have not poked my nose and found out what was inside that Jiffy bag, but I do know about the admitted use of therapeutic use exemptions, which is quite widespread and it's legal. Not ethical, but legal. I'll probably leave it at that.
Fair enough. There was a question at the front here.
Hi, sorry, I'm very conscious I've got my back to you. All you lot.
So my knowledge of the Tour de France is quite short. I probably watched the first tour in 2012,
right?
Maybe slightly beforehand.
How old were you in 2012?
8 years old.
Right.
Tour de France now is very different to what it was in 1923. Stages are a lot shorter.
Yeah.
Would you say riders now are potentially softer or have it a bit easier than they did back then?
I would say so. I would say so. These were hard guys, and if you look at the average speeds, they were not shabby. They were averaging mid-30s in kilometres an hour for 412 kilometres on gravel on iron bikes. They were, talking about doping, they were tremendous dopers. I mean, world class. Like the following year, one of the guys I pointed out to you in the film, Henri Pellissier, who wins the 1923 Tour de France, who was a villainous guy. By the way, I was going to tell you what happened to him in the end. Henri Pellissier retired from racing, and in the late 1930s, he was shot dead by his lover using the same pistol with which his wife had committed suicide because of his unfaithfulness. He was a right charmer. But Henri Pellissier, the following year in 1924, stormed off the race on stage 3. He started stage 3. He was the defending champion. And he had such a running battle with Henri Desgrange and the regulations that Desgrange would impose on the riders, which were really draconian. He stormed off the race, he mutinied, and he held an impromptu press conference in a cafe in a little village in Normandy called Coutances. And as part of that press conference, he emptied his kit bag and he said, "You know how hard the Tour de France is? We have to take all of this, bang!" And he emptied his kit bag just to survive. And out of this kit bag came a total cocktail of drugs, from absinthe to cocaine. Everything that he could get his hands on, they would take, just to numb the pain. They were very hard men. And this looks like a quaint amateur event. It wasn't. They were superstars. They were millionaires. They made a lot of money out of it, the top riders, and they were nationally celebrated. So it was a big deal. And I think that, if you could magically put Henri Pellissier into UAE Team Emirates. Maybe not that team. No, that team, actually. If you could put him into UAE Team Emirates, I think he would do a tremendous job for Tadej Pogacar. He'd probably be like third to last. Maybe he'd go Pellissier, then Rafa Majka, then Adam Yates, and then Tadej Pogacar.
So there's a question that came in from Richard Marsh, saying, which follows on from this. With your help, we look back awed at the efforts of the riders in the early tours. Lachlan Morton is probably riding in a similar way today,
yes,
more so than any other tour riders.
Yes.
Do you think more professional teams should embrace the mad bastards in their midst and pursue similar challenges? I just read it.
Lachlan Morton's really interesting. He is at the moment trying to break the Round Australia record, which is something like 30-something days, and he's going to smash it. He's on course for doing it in 20. So literally riding around Australia. And he's doing even greater distances than that, and he's doing it, backing it up day after day. But I don't think you'd mind me saying this, he wasn't a great racer, Lachlan. He doesn't have that kind of what it necessitates to actually get something out of road racing. So he looked for another avenue to exploit. And for me, he's a little bit like, I don't know if you go to like the Duomo in Milan, I don't know why I think of that landmark, but if you go there, you'll very often see football ball jugglers, like busking basically, and they'll do amazing things with the ball, sort of knocking it around like that and bouncing out, doing all these tricks, and everyone stands and gives them money. Put them on a pitch in an actual match and they'd be useless. And I think Lachlan's a bit like that. He's just found a kind of niche way of showing off his prodigious skill set, but they're not appropriate to road racing.
There's another question I'd like to bring in here from an anonymous attendee who comes to pretty much all of our events.
Right.
There's a lot of men in the Tour de France.
Yes.
What's your predictions for how women's cycling will develop?
Well, it's developing extremely fast. So it's on a very, very strong upward trajectory and has really risen to prominence even 5 or 6 years ago that I wouldn't have imagined. The last 2 editions of the Tour de France Femmes, as it's called, and by the way, it is indefensible that ASO, who organised the Tour de France, haven't renamed the Tour de France Hommes. But in the Olympics, you don't have the 100 metres final and the 100 metres for women. So that has to happen. I don't know why they haven't done that yet. But the Tour de France Femmes, the last day of racing in the Tour de France Femmes is one of the greatest denouements through a Grand Tour than anyone can remember this year. It needs to, and it will be very soon, 2 weeks long, and then we'll see where that goes. But it's almost growing too fast. So the structure, the quality of the racing at the highest level is outstripping the strength and depth in the peloton. So we need the teenage riders now to kind of like mature and fill the gaps in the peloton so that it's got the numbers of talented riders that the male peloton has. And then we're there. And I see no reason why very quickly there can't be something close to parity in the 2 calendars. Yeah, I feel really positive about women's racing. It's really interesting.
And there's a question back here.
Hi.
Hiya.
You mentioned earlier that a lot of professional cyclists are treated like celebrities. There is a strong, when you watch sort of European racing, you see people lining the roads, and it's really exciting. Do you think that sort of celebrity status of riders in Europe will ever translate to the UK? I mean, do you think we'll see people lining the streets like that over here, or things like the weather and the roads. And perhaps the fact that our professional sports of calendar is saturated already. So the reason that might be the case.
That's quite a good point. We try in this country, we try and win at everything, don't we? Absolutely everything, every sport. I talked about the ones we codified, so it's quite a crowded marketplace, I agree. That said, don't underestimate the impact that the Grand Départ in 2014 had on the world of racing. The crowds turn up, even a few weeks ago at the Tour of Britain Men, which it is called. The crowds were huge. So people do really come to support bike racing. And Remco Evenepoel, wherever he went, whether it was, where did we go? Lowestoft, Northampton, places like that. Remco Evenepoel was mobbed in a manner that really took him by surprise, actually. It's the first time he's raced here, and it was kind of like, really? So I think that bit works. If you could transplant magically the Tour de France into... God, it'd be a boring race, wouldn't it? But imagine if you could, into Great Britain. The crowds would be there, and they would turn up, and I think that bit is fully functional. What doesn't work is actually putting the bike races on in the first place here. We've dwindled to almost nothing, and there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lack of appetite amongst the brands for getting involved in cycling. Local authorities are losing interest in backing it as a kind of sporting event. It's quite expensive. And frankly, and this sounds really boring and technical, but it's absolutely fundamental to road racing, is the police. The bill for closing the roads and getting the police to close the roads is absolutely crippling and almost prohibitive. So the financial hurdles to overcome to put bike racing on in this country are at the moment going in one direction. It's really sad because the appetite amongst the public is most definitely there. And let's not forget that there was you mentioned 2012, I think 3 out of 4 years around about 2012, British male cyclists won Sports Personality of the Year. I can't remember the exact years, but it was Chris Hoy, Bradley Wiggins and Mark Cavendish. All of them did. And that says something about the status that, albeit briefly, cycling achieved in this country. And it's not gone away, it just needs to be re-energised.
Another question, we've just reached the last few things. If you've got questions burning, please do let me know. I see one back there, but can I just do this one? What will it take for UK drivers to treat cyclists the way continental drivers do? Is it just a question of cycling reaching a critical mass? Regards, Ian Hancock, cyclist and driver.
Yeah, probably segregated bike lanes. Simple as that. I think it's reached a point of this isn't working. And if we're serious about backing a cycling, I speak as a Londoner, and I think it's made, I think the good infrastructure in London is actually world class now, and I think it's made a real impact on people's lives and the numbers of, especially young folk who can't afford, wouldn't even think about owning a vehicle, and have identified the bike as the best way of getting around. They're only doing that because, on the routes and parts of London they work, they've got proper bike lanes. So I think. That's key to it, isn't it? Because that's what happened in the Netherlands. And they know a thing or two about how to get this right.
I'm taking you on the geek tour of cycle infrastructure in Cambridge, but another time. A question up there.
Dinner party question. Across the whole of the cycling world, across the whole of its history, who are your 3 guests that you'd have?
Gosh, 3 guests. Probably not Lance Armstrong, I think. I think we'll leave that one alone. I'm very fortunate. I've actually had lunch with Eddie Merckx. That was amazing. He can be quite truculent and grumpy, but he's Eddie bloody Merckx. You know what I mean? And I was just struck dumb by sitting next to him. So I'd like to do that slightly better and have Eddie back. Without a shadow of doubt, I would like to have Theophile Beekman from the film, whose descendants I tracked down, and I've kind of mythologized in my own mind because I inhabited him for the best part of a year. I would, when I eventually find and meet his granddaughter and her husband, only living descendants in Belgium, I say to we go out for lunch. I say, have you got at home? Have you got any of his memorabilia or kind of pictures? And they go, no. You see, he died a long time ago, and then we sold that house in 2010. And he did have a load of stuff, but I took it all to a charity shop in a black bin bag and handed it over, and I went, no! Which charity shop? And he said, it's the one down the road. I said, can you drop me off there? He said, it was 10 years ago. I said, I don't care. So I went into this charity shop in Belgium, and I said, this is going to sound a really strange question, but I'm looking for anything that might have survived from a bin bag that got brought here in 2010, and I rifled. So I'll definitely Theophile Beekman. He's coming. And then, just to lighten the mood a little bit, because one is a Flemish ghost, and the other is a very aging man from Brussels with bad arthritic knees, I think I would have, because she's just excellent company and one of the funniest, most common sense, brilliant people I've ever met, I'd have Lizzie Deignan, because she's ace. Yeah, I'd have her. There you go.
Fantastic. Yes, okay, we can fit one more here and then there's one thing from here, and then that'll be it. If you want to...
Hi, I've got another question about women's road racing.
Yes.
I think in the 60s, the longest athletics race in the Olympics for women was the 800 metres.
Yeah, I think you might be right, yeah.
And yeah, you see that I can't really see any difference on, or possibly better, women are better on stamina. So do you think that women's road races will become the same length as men's? Same as athletics?
Yeah, I don't see any reason, but my aspiration for that is that men's racing gets a bit shorter, actually, rather than women rising up to meet that kind of like gold standard of, if you think of a classic tour stage, it's maybe changed a little bit over the recent years, but certainly it hasn't at the Giro. You're talking 210 kilometres. It's too long.
You admire these 420-kilometre races?
No, I don't. I wouldn't like to. Listen, don't get me wrong. So gravel racing, which is very popular nowadays, I wouldn't watch a frame of that. It strikes me as totally boring. I'm sure they love doing it. Good on them. I'm not watching. It's incredibly dull. Incredibly dull. No, I want dynamic, short racing, and it's proven time and time again that if you put on a 130-kilometre stage, the point being that you can, if you attack that, you can sustain it and take it to the end. 200 kilometres, that inhibits attacking. So I think that, yes, women's race, there's no reason why it shouldn't be almost, if not the same length as men's, but men's needs to be shorter. So hopefully they'll meet in the middle, and then we'll have a more compelling offering, I think.
It also means less work for you commentators.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. As long as I don't try and knock my daily rates down.
So the final...
I'm not even joking, by the way, it's ITV.
The final question, just a simple one to finish off with. Who's going to win all the world's road races this year, Ned?
Well, I'm going out to Zurich on Saturday. I'm very much looking forward to it. I'm going to see both races, the women's and the men's. Women's is really hard to predict, given what happened at the Olympic road race. But I think that the unluckiest rider of the year has so far been Demi Follering. She's absolutely torn the head off every stage race that she entered in the first half of the year. And then she had a bit of bad luck in, Flanders. She had a lot of bad luck in another one of the classics, I can't remember. And then atrocious bad luck in both the Olympic road race and in the Tour de France. And her team haven't really supported her. So I want Demi Follering, and I think she will, think she's good enough to win the World Championship. She's not won it yet. And I actually, this might sound a boring answer, but I want Pogacar to round off what will probably be the greatest year of his life, unless he does something even better next year, which I don't really get how you do that. But I want him just to put the seal on it by taking those rainbow bands that he hasn't yet won, and I think he'll be hard to stop.
Well, we'll see if you're right, and judge your commentary by whether you make the predictions correctly. So, Ned, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. Cheers.